Yo, what's happening, guys? Welcome to a brand new edition of Rave Diaries and Tower Block Tales with yours truly, Uncle Doug's in the hot seat. As always, before we go anywhere, I just want to thank everybody for watching all the previous episodes that you've watched, and liking and commenting and subscribing with the channel, with the other playlist, the Run Come Follow and the archives and all of it. Thank you, guys. But this channel especially, I mean, we're on Rave Diaries and Tower Block Tales today. And I've been saying it in the last few videos, and I really mean it. The little community that we're building up, and the stories that we're coming across underneath all the comment section, like your stories associated to whatever it is that I'm talking about on that particular video. I mean, they're building and building and building. So the more comments, the better. I'm loving going back over them. I reply to them. I'll read them all. It's proper. Anyway, right, on with today's episode. So today, out of my little magic red box, I found this here. So I'll show you as best I can. Ready for this? So what that says on there is pager NOS, and then there's some radio stations underneath with some numbers. So pager NOS is pager numbers, and underneath we've got Chilling, Innocence, Pulse, and Destiny. So this must have been, I would imagine, very early 1991, maybe April, May of 1991, I would have written this down. And for those of you that are of a certain age, you'll remember what pages were and what pager numbers were used for. And for the younger ones to the channel that maybe have heard of them or have never even heard of a pager, I'm going to explain now. Not only that, I'm going to explain a little bit about the importance and how the timeline of communication between the DJ on a pirate radio station and the listener has sort of evolved. So we'll go all the way back to the start. Pager numbers. So the first one up here, it says Chilling FM. 840 7000. Then there's a little dash and it says 089 2182. So what that means is to get a shout. So before mobile phones were a thing, people still wanted to shout on the radio. And the way around it was the radio station had a thing called a pager. So a pager was like a little machine. It would clip on your belt. They were meant to be for business people so that they could be, or emergencies or whatever, so they could be paged to say you're needed here or you wanted there or what do you think about this. I think the original ones were just a beep with a phone number, and over time they evolved to let you send a little message. But it wasn't like text messaging of today where you sent the message. You had to speak to somebody in a call centre, tell them your message, and then they would type it into their, I'm assuming, machine, and then their machine would send it to the BT pager. I think BT were really the only one. I might be wrong, Cellnet and they probably had them as well, but I remember everyone had a BT pager. And yeah, they would send your message on. So 840 7000, for instance, to ring up Chilling. You would ring that number and then you would get someone, usually a lady, would pick the phone up and say, hello, which number do you require? And you would say 089 2182. So she'd put it through, and what is your message? And then you'd say, yeah, big shout out to the Dagenham Massive, blah, blah, blah. Or whatever the message might be that you sent. You'd hear again, tapping it into her keyboard. And then off it would be sent. So, and then in the studio, obviously, it would go beep, 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 and they'd look at it and say, pick up the Dagenham Massive, blah, blah, blah. They'd read it out on the mic, jobs are good. Obviously, mobile phones come in a little bit further down the line, but in my original pirate days of getting my first shouts, this was it. The Chilling number was, when you got through, it was 089 2182. Innocence, when you got through, 0899 477. Pulse FM, when you got through, was 089 2183. And Destiny was, when you got through, 140 6985. So that was 4 stations I must have been listening to around that era, that I've wrote down their pager numbers. So yeah, that was the first era. By, I guess, 92, 93 especially, mobile phones. I mean, mobile phones were a thing back then, but they was expensive and they was more for the yuppies and that. They hadn't really infiltrated pirate radio. Drug dealers had started to use them. But even drug dealers were still really using pagers back then. It was more phone box, pager. That was the thing. But over the 92, 93, people started to get, normal people, working class, normal going to work people started to get mobile phones in their lives. And these were just mobile phones that you could literally make a call on. There was no text message. There wasn't even a phone book. The first mobile phone I had didn't even have a phone book. I used to have a little notepad with my phone numbers in, and then I had a phone. So when someone would ring you, it would just say call, and when you dialed out, it would just come up with the numbers on the screen, and you would send it. So yeah, that was the first mobile phones. But what that did for pirate radio culture was it opened up the one-to-one between the listener and the artist in the studio, DJ, MC, whatever. So for us lot as listeners back then, before I was on the radio, you would either, if you had a phone in your house, which wasn't always a given, if you was allowed to use that phone in your house, which wasn't always a given, some phones had locks on them and stuff. I had mates that had pay phones in their house back in the day. You know, it was real. So you would go down the phone box, you put your money in the phone box, and you'd make the call to the phone in the studio. You'd hear them pick up the phone, and there'd be better music in the background. And, hello, it's Call FM, and you'd be like, yeah, big up Doug's and whatever in Dagenham and blah 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 and all that. And then you run back to your house, because obviously by the time they come off the phone, they're going to read the shout out pretty soon after. You link it back to your house. Sometimes you catch it, sometimes you wouldn't. But that was the first step in like moving forward with communications between listener and DJ in the studio. The next step in that was text messaging and being able to do missed calls for rewind. So later models of phones started to get phone books in them, so you could store numbers and names. So regulars to the radio station would send in their name and number. You would store that in a studio phone, and then when they rang up, it would come up their name. So it'd be like, yeah, big up Sheila in Rayleigh or whatever. That was a terrible name to pull out of the bag. I don't think I've ever bigged up Sheila in Rayleigh. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. So, and then you would do the old 5 missed calls for a rewind. So they would pop off the phone, and then you'd be like, big up Dave, big up Tom, big up Leroy, big up Del, and big up flipping Linda. And that's your 5 missed calls. But around that same sort of time, I can't remember what come first, but text messages, which they said would never catch on, funnily enough, originally. I remember the first phones with text, and none of us used them. It's like, why are you going to text someone like when you can just like, hello, yeah. Obviously now we don't even like talking to each other. We all use Messenger and text and WhatsApp and all of that. But in the world of pirate, text messages were cheaper to make than a phone call. So if you wanted to actually get a message in rather than a missed call, you would use the text message to say like, big up this one and big up that one, or something to do with an event you might have heard the DJs, whatever. That was your way of communicating then. And then of course the invention of the internet brought along WhatsApp, and I mean before that, going back before that, before WhatsApp, radio stations started having email addresses, because originally if you wanted to contact a radio station, pirate, usually they'd be connected to a radio shop of some sort, or some kind of place where they could have tapes, like mixtapes, demo tapes, stuff like that, or records and stuff like that sent to. But the internet obviously changed all of that, and I remember stations first getting email addresses before anyone even really sent emails. No one even really knew what the internet was, but email addresses started to pop up so you could get a shout read out over email. So you'd send it and then you get it read out on the next week's show. But obviously, like pirate radio is always bang, 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 bang. No one wants to wait till next week for a shout. So the next involvement was, of course, like phones that could take instant messenger. MySpace was a huge thing in not in the one-to-one, but in the sort of communication between. This was the start of a DJ not being up there anymore, that you couldn't see them or touch them. They were just in the darkness on a stage. MySpace and this era was the first time you could communicate one-to-one, and we started to see a little bit behind the curtain of how artists were as people. MySpace was the first one that really caught fire like that. So even though it wasn't like where you got your shouts as such, it was somewhere where you could communicate with these guys that beforehand you couldn't, you know what I mean, unless you bumped into them in a rave or a record shop. You couldn't communicate with them. So MySpace gave us that. But then, yeah, the next evolution would be the instant messenger type thing, and I guess WhatsApp is, of course, leading the way with that. And what that done, that gave us instant messaging in terms of like not just phone calls, but there's videos and photos and bits and bobs and everything that you can send backwards and forwards from listener to DJ or vice versa. Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes a listener might ask you while you're on the radio about a rave. Instead of telling them, you can now send them the flyer straight to their phone from the studio phone. You know what I mean? So it's opened up a two-way communication like that. And I mean, one thing we should mention as well, because it was pirate radio and it was also always cat and mouse with the DTI or Ofcom. One way they used to catch pirate radio stations was to triangulate the signal, which sounds really complicated, but it's not as complicated as it sounds. So a mobile phone gives out a signal, and if you can hone in on that signal, which the DTI knew how to do, you can locate where that's coming from. So what happened was, originally, we would take phone calls in the studio, someone would say, big up so-and-so, you tell the MC, oh, big up so-and-so, and they would do that. And what everyone kind of slowly worked out after a few people got nicked was, you can't pick the phone up. So pirate stations, for a period, would actually fine DJs, financially fine them if they caught them answering the phone, because it only took them to pick the phone up, the signal goes live, triangulate the thing, and they get your studio and you lose all your equipment and you have to go off air and all of that. Maybe get nicked, lose everything. So that was why the missed call was such an important thing, and a text message, because not only did it help us to communicate in a way that was sort of like moving forward with technology, but it also threw the powers that be off of our scent as pirates. So yeah, I remember, you know, at times running rinse in the sort of early 2000s, that time there, when it was like, you don't answer the studio phone. You know, we had a different phone for talking to people on, and we had a studio phone that if you're caught answering that, you're up shit street. You know what I mean? So yeah, and I guess now we're in an era where it's just so commonplace to just use the technology at hand to communicate with people, that only kind of shows that are sort of like mine, that are sort of retro based or authentic people from that era that still do a radio show where they want to give shouts out to people, and that one-to-one communication with each listener at that moment is important to them. It's important to me when I do my show. I love getting that message off a listener, giving that back to them, giving out shouts to everyone, making everyone feel a family and a community. That gives me the buzz. But in this modern era of radio and music, it's more, you know, your podcasty kind of, maybe do an intro and an outro, but the whole hour or 2 hours of the show is pretty much music. Maybe they'll give you some info on the music, but it's not really that one-to-one with the listener. You know, I think that that's really important, because I come from an era like of pager numbers and that, where it makes the listener feel included and important. But we're in an era now where a lot of things have changed in the industry, music industry, and I don't think to the youngsters that getting a shout on the radio means what it did to us lot when we were younger and as we grew up. Like, even now when I give people shouts that are in their 40s, 50s and 60s, I get the buzz, they get the buzz. Do you know what I mean? It's just something that we've grown up on, that the world outside of our world don't understand like we do. They don't understand the vibe and the feeling that it's given us over the years. Even though now people say on the telly, like, "Yeah, big shout out," or people say on a normal radio, big shout out. It's become a thing that's said. The culture of the big shout out is pirate radio culture, and it means more to us than just a big shout out. It's a term of endearment, it's a term of respect, it's an acknowledgement, it's a tilt and nod of your head, whether it be across the radio or when you're walking a dance. And yeah, it has kind of filtered and watered itself down over the years, and maybe one day it'll be lost in the sands of time. But to us lot, the pager crew, the text crew, the phone line missed call crew, all of us through the years, this meant the world. So yeah, I felt it deserved its own video. Yeah, so from me to you lot, yeah, big up the phone line crew. I've said that 10 million times in my life. I don't even know how many people I've picked up in my life. It's ridiculous. But the funny thing is, just a quick offshoot, and one day when we do a story about Conflict FM and the start and all of that, I'll tell you a bit more. But I remember doing radio shows in them early days, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4, 5, 6, sometimes we go through the night, 10 hours. Not one phone call. I didn't even know if anyone was listening, but you know what? I didn't care back then, and things grew over the years, and now I've established a radio show that's got a lot of listeners and a lot of love, and you know, every week I get loads of messages, and I still do it in the style that I always have done. But yeah, it's funny how how important something just as simple as the shout is to us lot, and I've give out so many in my life, and for everyone I've give out, that's give me a little 0.5% back into my recharge, you know what I mean, to keep you doing the next show and the next show, and here we are all these 30 something or whatever years later. So yeah, big up the phone line crew. Alright, I'm going to leave it on that today. Big up the phone line crew. Peace.